Now we've kind of hit the point of no return.
Something so completely different.
If someone told me I could be in a movie if I shaved my head, I would do it.
There's this ominous, ever-present fear or presence or God or something out there that is watching you.
People can be so evil. Welcome back to an all-new season of Rise and Fall, where we peer down the rabbit hole and into the minds of the world's most notorious cult leaders to understand how they are able to manipulate regular people into doing unspeakable things.
People not much different from you or me. Merle, lover of misunderstood mammals, like rats and bats.
And me, Joyce, who will not f with a rat, but will f with a monster, who has my whole heart. RM, I love you. And on that note, let's get into today's drama. Heaven's Gate, a cult that culminated in a tragic mass suicide of 39 people in 1997.
This is one of the best known cults of the internet age because they were the first to use the web to spread their gospel, which was a little out of this world.
Their objective was to go intergalactic, to transcend their mortal bodies and take their place on a spaceship heading to heaven, while sporting some now very rare Nikes. But before we get ahead of ourselves, let's meet our expert.
I'm Dr. Quincy Gideon. I'm a clinical psychologist and I specialize in religious trauma and cult recovery.
The fit is fire.
I know, we've been whispering about it. I wish I could dress like you. The captain of these metaphysical cosmonauts was co-founder and leader Marshall Applewhite Jr., born in Spur, Texas on May 17, 1931. His father was a minister and he grew up incredibly religious. He studied philosophy in college and briefly studied theology to become a minister. But he dropped out of his seminary to pursue a career in music. Apparently, he was a talented baritone. What is with these musicians?
I do love a baritone.
But like every single cult leader is a musician, am I wrong?
That is true. Wait, did you know I used to sing opera? I was in the opera
I
choir.
do know this.
However, he struggled to make it as a performer and ultimately accepted a position teaching at the University of Alabama to support his family.
Things went off the rails as a professor. He lost his position after having an affair with a male student. And he didn't just lose his job for it, he lost his family. His wife took the kids and divorced him, and his family rejected him when he tried to come out to them.
Can you tell us a little bit more about the psychology of Marshall Applewhite Jr.?
I think that he started with some rigidity and he needed those same rules, right? He needed that same kind of structure and scaffolding that would hold up his psychology, but he also needed it to be a little bit more flexible, to have things like UFOs and extraterrestrials and another world, that he wasn't stuck here, that there was a possibility of another world out there.
Unable to keep a job due to his emotional struggles, his debts mounted and he relied on friends to loan him money. While visiting one of these loyal friends in a Houston hospital in 1972, he met a middle-aged nurse who would completely change his life. Heaven's Gate co-founder Bonnie Lou Nettles.
Born in 1927, Nettles was a Houston native with a devout Baptist upbringing. But she was very into the occult, charting stars, hosting seances, and taking advice from a sort of spirit guide she called Brother Francis, whom she believed to be a 19th century monk. Like Applewhite, she was well versed in the Bible, a parent of 4, and a divorcee who had just gotten out of her unhappy marriage.
Can you tell me a little bit more about Bonnie's psychology?
As best we know, she grew up in a relatively normal family. She had a really scary miscarriage and then 2 stillbirths before her first child, Terry, was born. It's hard to know what happens in postpartum, in my opinion. She did have what most cult leaders and cult members have, which is that desire for a better world. She was a nurse, but the passions remain, right? So you add trauma, you add wanting the world to be a better place, and someone comes along and says that they have the answer to that. That's really sexy for someone who really is at the end of their rope and perhaps is in some sort of relationship dynamic that's not working for them.
Their platonic connection was immediate. Applewhite felt like he had known her for a long time, possibly in a past life, and Nettles believed that their connection was for a divine purpose. She said that their star chart showed uncanny alignment and claimed that she was sent premonitions by celestial beings. extraterrestrials, and had fortune tellers prepare her for the arrival of someone who looked like Applewhite.
This is literally what we did outside of a birthday party at night. We were drunk.
Drunk out of our minds.
Yeah, we were
A little intoxicated.
Yeah, we're a little tipsy. We had never had the chance to like sit down and talk to each other, and we said like, God, I feel like I've known you for like multiple lifetimes.
Yeah.
It's too easy.
It's something about when you meet someone and you're like, dang, I know you.
Yeah.
I am definitely leaning yes, because I do believe that there are some people that you meet in your life that you're just connected to.
Yeah, definitely leaning towards yes. Applewhite claimed to have communed directly with God just before meeting Nettles, which psychiatric experts now believe may have been linked to a paranoid disorder. But he sought her wisdom on that encounter and other metaphysical questions. Together, they created a new delusional reality, escaping their unhappy lives and building self-esteem by giving themselves not just a place in the world, but a place at the top, as divine messengers, missionaries for a religion they cobbled together in letters and eventually manifestos.
I think that they were experiencing deep human suffering in a way that was maybe not acknowledged at the time. There's probably the attachment systems that were at play there, and there's also the ways in which there's charisma. And suddenly he has all of the answers too. I think that probably played right in on her vulnerabilities.
Among topics they studied and discussed were Christology, asceticism, and eschatology, particularly as related to the King James Bible as well as works of science fiction. They became convinced that they were meant to fulfill biblical prophecies and were the two end-time witnesses referred to in Revelations 11, giving birth to one of their many future nicknames, the Two. They went so far as to suggest that Jesus had been reincarnated as a Texan in one of their brochures, of course referring to Applewhite himself.
What do you know? We got another white guy claiming to be Jesus. Surprise, surprise.
I wonder if ever gets tired of everybody wanting to like take his name, take his clout. Like that's Jesus's clout.
There's also vulnerable narcissism, which really has a victim-y mentality to it. Believing that you are the second coming of Jesus probably is in line with some level of narcissism, but there was also this vulnerability, this victimhood, this I can't fully love myself, I can't fully accept myself, or perhaps his narcissism said that there was a part of him that he had to get rid of.
They like to say that the folly of mainstream religions was passivity, using the metaphor of caterpillars and butterflies to illustrate their point. Caterpillar can't become a butterfly without first entombing itself into a chrysalis, entering into a space where it could transcend forms and enter the next level. And for the Two, they believed their next level, specifically, might entail a spaceship, referring to their predicted public ascension, something they called the demonstration.
In 1975, after Applewhite was released for a short stint in jail for credit card fraud, they were ready to take their show on the road, heading to what the New York Times calls, quote, America's great incubator for new eclectic guru-led religions, end quote. The state of California. First stop, Los Angeles.
In May, they held their first meeting seeking potential disciples with matching shaven heads and tracksuits. The Two appealed to a group of about 80 guests. Applewhite was their speaker, and his demands were not simple. He straight up told guests that if they wanted to become followers, they must obey everything the Two said and give up their possessions, families, and identities.
To spend 1 minute with Namjoon from BTS. I'd shave my head right now.
Okay.
So,
I think it's just not as simple as it seems, right? You just have to dangle the thing you're really attracted to in front of you. Not just you, me too. If someone told me I could be in a movie if I shaved my head, like a good movie, I would do it. What are your takeaways on the indoctrination into this cult?
Indoctrination is the process of slowly over time pulling someone into a belief system that really steps away from how they previously saw themselves. And so how that typically happens, there's a couple of different ways that thought reform can happen. You can control the milieu around someone's life, so how they dress, what their gender can be, how they eat, where they live, who they have access to. They're gonna have very specific language that shows we're in the in group and you're in the out group. And then there is the doctrine of purity, the demand for purity. And those things I think were pretty evident over time, that there was purity from sexuality, purity from contamination from the outside world. There was lots of ways in which that contributes to someone stepping away from who they were and how they functioned in the world into the group.
I'm in the middle.
I think I'm gonna remain in the middle too, because I don't think just the obey everything is like, they're saying that outright.
Yeah, I feel like they're like, listen to us, let us guide you.
Yes.
And then they're like, well, we want to be together. We want to be with you. So give us your checking account. They would have been very disappointed with mine, but other people's checking accounts, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Somehow, about 2,000 people responded to the messaging. The two leaders built a mystic ethos of leadership. Nettles fulfilled the role of sage. Applewhite had no problem being in the spotlight and served as their orator.
Over the next 2 decades, hundreds more would come and go from their flock, lending to another one of their nicknames, Bo and Peep. Followers' ages, socioeconomic, and education levels were varied, and by their final count, relatively equal amounts of men and women joined.
Their commonality was based on a desire to seek spiritual truth or a deeper understanding of human consciousness. Many had already sought out answers from other religious or counterculture sources, with gurus, transcendental meditation, or ritual psychedelic drugs.
For the next several years, followers would gather to live communally in campsites and later in homes across the West, preparing for the arrival of the spaceship. Their teachings emphasized humility and patience, seeing as they had no idea when it was coming. As much as possible, they attempted to keep their followers outside of society, in part to stave off an infection of the many temptations of the outside world.
Part of having Heaven's Gates theology was that we were just meat sacks. Our bodies were literally just holders. The hope was that we would leave these meat sacks behind and be able to ascend to the next level.
They practiced various disciplines they believed would prepare them for their transition, many of which were meant to teach non-attachment to their worldly selves, such as sharing all clothes, even underwear, taking appearances that did not express gender, experimenting with their diet for purification, referring to themselves as monks, and, most importantly, devoting themselves to celibacy.
Seeing as Applewhite suffered greatly throughout his lifetime with his desire for same-sex romantic and sexual desires, it seems convenient that one of his cult's mainstays was to make even thinking about sex forbidden for all followers. They avoided markers of gender taking on androgynous forms, but they slept segregated by sex, although gay men slept with women and lesbians slept with men. In the cases of at least 9 members, including Applewhite, they even castrated themselves.
I'm out.
Yeah, I mean, me too. Now we've kind of hit the point of no return, right?
But it also, some of the members were LGBT members.
Openly gay, I guess, right? Openly.
So some of the members who were part of the LGBT community had their own internalized, like, homophobia and self-hatred the same way that Applewhite did.
Mm-hmm.
I think that Applewhite was influenced to create Heaven's Gate after a long period of likely sexual denial. He felt like that was the way, per reports, that he could have a joyful and jolly existence with other people because sex was off the table.
He hated himself. Like, it's so clear that he hated himself.
And the other cult leaders that we've covered loved themselves, adored themselves, saw themselves better than humans and better than everyone. And so it's just really interesting with Applewhite's case is that he hated himself so much that not only did he create a cult, but he created like a community of people to hate themselves as well. Nettles lost her eye to cancer in 1983, and 2 years later passed away after the cancer spread to her liver. In the wake of her death, the group essentially changed their theology to create a narrative that allowed her to have ascended to the next level with or without the coming of the spaceship.
Overcome with grief, Applewhite was apparently unsure whether he could continue to lead without Nettles at his side. One former member even said he seemed to be looking for a way out, whether by, quote, disease or his own suicide, end quote. He struggled briefly with doubt of his own sanity and wondered if he should send everyone home. Instead, he resolved to continue her life's purpose and moved them all again to California, where he cautiously began to recruit again, sending members to Sexaholics Anonymous meetings in LA, broadcasting videotapes via satellite, and even created a website that promised readers a gate to heaven, which is where the name we use now comes from.
In fact, they were the first well-known American cult to use the internet to build income. By the mid-90s, members had learned to support themselves financially by making websites for others and built a successful computer consulting business.
I think one of the ways that Heaven's Gate used their internet age was they used videos. They were really compelling to people at the time, and I think it's more about his presentation, the way that Applewhite really presented himself. It pulls at you, it's compelling. There's enough truth kind of peppered in it that you start to question yourself.
They were able to afford a large estate in a wealthy gated community in Rancho Santa Fe, California, in San Diego County.
Though material things didn't matter to them, the location of their extravagant new home was intentional. The houses were incredibly private, which they needed for their future plans, and zoning laws banned streetlights, giving them a great view of the stars. They needed to be on the lookout for Comet Hale-Bopp, which had first been spotted a year before by astronomers.
It was a huge comet, 25 miles wide and icy to its core, and it was set to pass by Earth during the spring equinox, the kind of astrological event that only occurred once every few hundred years. It was photographed showing a small shower of light behind it. The New Age and UFO communities alike believed the spaceship was coming our way, and Applewhite began preaching that its approach represented the closure to Heaven's Gate.
I think it's important for us to understand the fear and manipulation tactics within the context of the afterlife. So what typically happens in groups like this is that there's this ominous, ever-present fear or presence or God or something out there that is watching you, and you can mess up at any time, and there's eternal consequences to it. So at this point, most people had been indoctrinated to believe that we were just waiting here Earthside for, Hale-Bopp comet to come so that we could, ascend to the next level. And that meant that an entire belief system had been built around the next level. So there's always this eternal threat in the background, and it can be used against them at any time, and then they're manipulated to constantly deny their human experiences, their fear, their sadness over losing their family.
Gaslighting's been around for a long time, huh?
It has been. It's older than man.
Like Nettles over a decade before, the time had come for them to shed their bodily husks and ascend to the spaceship. By now, there were only 39 loyal members, including Applewhite. Within a month of Applewhite's declaration that it was finally time for them to reach the next level of existence above human, all the necessary preparations had been made.
I think I'm leaning a no at this point because it's just like the spaceship has come and there's not as many people as before. It just makes it seem like a lot of Applewhite's teaching had become more extreme.
I can say, no, of course I wouldn't do that. But depending on what state of mind or emotional space I'm in, who knows?
On March 22nd and 23rd, 1997, the group died by mass suicide in 3 groups of 15, 15, and 9. Each mixed a heavy dose of phenobarbital, a strong sedative, with applesauce or pudding and washed it down with vodka. They then secured plastic bags around their heads after ingestion to induce asphyxiation, essentially seeping their way through their own suffocation. So the ascent never happened, but the mass suicide happened. Is there any way that you could possibly explain to us how someone can participate in that when they're in a cult?
In order to get someone to a place of suicide, I think it's a multi-step process. The first is a really interesting indoctrination process, right, which pulls them in and doesn't leave them much option. I think the other thing that was really powerful was that it felt to them, as far as we know from the documentation that was left behind, it felt to them that staying would actually be the suicide, and that suicide was saving themselves.
On March 26, 1997, all 39 bodies were found by the authorities. They were dressed in black shirts and sweatpants, armbands that read Heaven's Gate Away Team, and matching Nike athletic shoes, a style that was discontinued after the horrific event, but have since been listed for sale online for over $6,000. The authorities had been alerted to check out the Rancho Santa Fe property by an anonymous source, who was later revealed to be a former Heaven's Gate member, who had been directed by Applewhite to stay behind to tell the world their story.
People can be so evil.
I agree. I think one of the things that I'm a huge proponent of in order to stop this unnecessary emotional manipulation that happens is like some sort of training against emotional manipulation. I teach cult survivors we have a group that meets every month, and I teach them how to spot emotional manipulation, because although they've been survivors of it, they still have a hard time seeing it because it's never plain. And so I think if we could be better at spotting emotional manipulation, spotting things like narcissism, we might be a little bit more at peace with just turning and walking in the other direction without feeling like we're bad people, and feel good enough about knowing what it is so that we can get out of there.
It's hard to understand what could motivate anyone to participate in something as deeply tragic and traumatic as a mass suicide. Some experts have said in the case of Heaven's Gate, Applewhite and Nettles' followers may have been brainwashed, arguing that their tactics cultivated an attitude of complete religious obedience and entirely isolated their victims socially, rendering their victims totally dependent upon them.
When the time came, they couldn't imagine how to function in a world outside of his control.
I mean, I just feel like it's always good to ask, like, if there's anyone who's watching who feels like they're in this situation, what would you say to them?
I would say seek safety. Find some way to get away for a short amount of time in order to contact people. Take your time, but start working on a plan to get out. And then as soon as you're able, get into trauma care, because there's going to be a lot of trauma history and narrative that's going to come up as you heal and as you start making decisions around what's your next relationship, and how do you mourn, and how do you grieve the lost years of your life, and how do you make sense of what's happened to you. I really think that a trauma specialist is the person to find.
If there's one thing that you can take away from this show, don't let a cult leader take away your power.
Don't let anyone take away your power.
All right, join us next week where we talk about another cult.
Yeah, join us next week where we traumatize ourselves and you, but we also learn and become better people through it. Right? That's what we tell ourselves.
And my therapist is on speed dial.
There you go.
Next episode, we get an inside account of Children of God, straight from the granddaughter of the notorious cult leader, David Berg. Be sure to watch. It's a doozy.